just a 16 bars. That's real hip hop.
We try to tell people that Philly is a special breed.
They hate to see us on top, they hate to see us on. They hate to see us come up, they hate we on. They hate the moves that we make because it's made to break them. We give them knowledge on tracks and hope our words can save them. I guess it's hard to give props when you know you lesser. So we right on your heels, I hope you feel the pressure. Rappers taking a roll, my shoes will never fit them. Before you come at a king, I let my soul.
So this happened to me. I was driving by my middle school, and this was a memory from 6th grade where my 6th grade teacher, she was our Spanish teacher, and she would like make the white kids change their first names to Hispanic names. What was that? Does it help you learn? It's like, okay, so I'm a Jose now? I don't understand. I'm going through puberty. I have enough of an identity crisis as it is. But my best friend Jeff, he didn't play ball. On his name tag, he wrote Mr. Goodbar. Like the candy bar. And here's the memory. My teacher sees it, and she lost her mind. And she goes, "You can't call yourself Mr. Goodbar!" And he goes, "Why not?" And she goes, "Because Mr. Goodbar is a porn star!" And I'm like, there's no way I'm remembering that correctly.
We're now joined by a very funny man, Blake Wexler. He is on a national tour, actually headed to the Philly area soon. Blake, welcome to Philly on the Rise. How are you, man?
Yeah, it's great to be here. I love being on the rise. I love Philly. We're 2 for 2. You seem like a good guy. So yeah, we're 3 for 3. It's nice being here.
3 for 3 indeed, man. 3 for 3 indeed. So you started your comedic career at the age of 15 in the Philly area. 2007, you moved up to Boston for college and also to pursue your comedic career. Talk to us about those early days of comedy for you.
Yeah, so I started my sophomore year of high school, Conestoga High School, out in the Philly suburbs, and I didn't really have anything that I liked doing or that I was remotely good at. My parents were like, "We got to find our kid something to do so he has something that resembles a future." And I really liked stand up, so they signed me up for one of those night classes and took the class, and the graduation show was like in front of a bunch of friends and family, but like none of my friends could go because it was in a bar and they weren't old enough. So like I did that. It was fun, and started doing open mics around Philly, but like I couldn't drive because I was 15, 16 years old. So my mom would drive me to these weird open mics at like 10:30 at night on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And then, yeah, I just loved it. I mean, that's the worst version of it. So if I loved it then, I was definitely going to love it when it started getting a little bit better, and it did. And I kept doing it in Boston and lived in LA for 10 years, was doing it there. And yeah, the rest is the rest.
Yeah, so that Philly area experience, the Boston area experience is all about honing your skills. As you mentioned, you're now living in LA, and you've also written for Comedy Central.
Yeah, so I also stopped myself so I lived in LA for 10 years, and then during COVID I actually moved back to Philly for like 3.5 years. I was living in Fairmount, got married to my now wife there, and then when I was living in Philly, I got my first stand-up special. So it's funny, lived in LA for 10 years where the entertainment business is supposed to be, that it took me moving back to Philly. There's something to say about how good the Philly comedy scene is, the fact that it kind of like gave me that little jolt. So yeah, I worked, I was in LA, like would write some like, sketches and stuff for Comedy Central, and worked for ABC for a period, and got to meet a ton of great comics, great people. And but now I'm back. I'm living in New York now after spending 3.5 years back in Philly, and I'm back in Philly all the time. I'm coming back there next week, December 5th, for a show at Helium. So yeah, Philly, truly my favorite. It's my favorite place. I can't stop talking about it. It's all I talk about.
I'm glad you say that. You talk about the jolt that the Philly area has given you for your comedic chops, but tell us about the Blake album.
So that was my first stand-up album, and I think that came out in like 2016. I was in my whatever, yeah, I guess I was in my early 20s, mid 20s, and I actually recorded that at Helium in Philly. So Helium was like my home and remains my what you would call like your home comedy club. And that was the first time I think I produced it myself. Like I didn't put it out with a label or anything. And it was a blast. So like yeah, I've released I think four since then. My first special about a year ago. So but yeah, it's feel like that club Helium is for my money the best comedy club in the country, and a lot of that has to do with the Philly crowds.
And you have one of these specials that's presently on YouTube, an hour-long
Mhm.
special. Which of that can we find on YouTube?
Yeah, so that's called Daddy Longlegs. That's my debut hour video stand-up special. And I put that out with a label called 800 Pound Gorilla, which has produced a ton of great specials, like Sal Volcano from The Impractical Jokers, like Chad Daniels, just a bunch of Sashir Zamata, like so many great stand-ups. So Nate Bargatze, I was real psyched to get my, that they liked me enough to pay for a special for me. So, yeah, that one was great. And I ran that hour actually at Helium in Philly before I filmed it in Cincinnati. So it always comes back to Philly in some way or another.
All roads lead back to Philly.
It's true. I-95 does literally, and then some other roads. I think you can get there.
Tell us about some of the podcasts you have been or are part of because there's quite a few.
Yeah, so there's a podcast called The Daily Zeitgeist, which is a aptly named podcast because it comes out every day. And that actually has helped me kind of cultivate an audience where when I go on the road and tour, when you first start headlining, like that's when you're the main comic, you kind of don't necessarily have an audience, a built-in audience where people will show up because they're like, I want to see comedy tonight, which is weird because you wouldn't go to a concert and be like, I want to see music. Like you would research the band and see like who you're going to go see. But for some reason, stand up now, because of like Netflix podcasts, stand up has become so, like kind of second nature to people. You're able to consume so much of it. People are starting to get it. But with the Daily Zeitgeist podcast, I now have been able, whenever I go to a city, any city, I generally have people come up to me afterwards and they're like, "Oh, we listened to you on this thing." And I'm like, "Okay, cool." They already know me going into the show. So when you're on stage, the first few minutes as a stand-up, you're trying to get the audience to know you, to like you, to get your point of view. But I'm kind of already, ahead with those people, which is great. It makes the show better.
Nice, very nice. And there's another podcast that you're a part of as well.
Yeah, I've done the Todd Glass show was a podcast I was a part of for a while, and Todd is a great stand-up comedian, a close friend of mine, and he actually is from Philly as well. So he went to Conestoga High School also, different times. We have a joke where Todd's been doing stand-up for like 25, 30 years. So we did not graduate together, but we have a joke where he'll be like, "Oh, like Blake, you went to Conestoga, right? Like when did you graduate?" And I'll be honest and say in '07. And he goes, "Oh yeah, I graduated in like '04." So we probably know the same people. So but yeah, Todd's the best. So that podcast is another one. A lot of comics respect that podcast. So it was kind of like when I moved to LA, I had a co-signer almost on my career in Todd. So yeah, that one's meant a lot to me.
Originally from the Philly area, then you moved back, as you mentioned, you were here for 3.5, almost 4 years. Tell us, Blake, where do folks go to get the best cheesesteak?
That is one of the most controversial questions I think in humanity, like across, like internationally. It's you might call it an international incident. My favorite cheesesteaks. So I would get for me, I'm like, what can I get delivered? There's like, what can I get delivered, and what can I get when I'm in a certain neighborhood? So like Cleavers, I like. Oh Brother, I like, and then this is a kind of a trick answer, but Bad Brother, which is a restaurant in Fairmount, my wife and I's favorite restaurant in the world. They had like a different take on a cheesesteak. So the other two classic choices, also D'Alessandro's is great in Roxborough, but Bad Brother will do a chorizo cheesesteak essentially, and that's insane. Like that's really good. So if you want to switch it up a little bit, they're there. I'm trying to think if I'm missing any, but yeah, those are the Oh Brother, Cleavers. Oh, and of course, Angelo's is great too. So yeah, I got to give. Everyone says Angelo's. I love Angelo's. So yeah, I got to put them in there too.
You didn't mention any of the touristy spots, Geno's, Pat's. Whenever there's a football game or a basketball game, you see the camera kind of panning for those two places. You didn't mention those.
So here's the thing. I like those two. Like everyone from Philly, it's not cool. And that's why I didn't do it because I'm like, oh, it's not cool to mention Pat's and Geno's. I still think they're delicious, especially after a game. Maybe you don't have all your mental faculties with you. So like it's still those are delicious. It's hard, like you're starting at a B plus with a cheesesteak. So it's like what are the ones that are A pluses is like what I was trying to think of.
Yeah, 100%, man. I
Mhm.
actually think when you go into some of the neighborhoods, you mentioned Roxborough, you mentioned
Yeah,
Fairmont. I think that's where you find the better cheesesteaks, in my opinion.
I agree. We're on the same page for sure.
Yeah, 100%. So you've lived in LA, you're now living in
Mhm.
New York. I imagine you're still an Eagles fan, even though
Oh
you've
yeah.
lived in these different parts of the country.
Yeah, huge Eagles fan. It dominates my life. Have been an Eagles fan since I was a kid. I've had the privilege to work with them a little bit where I hosted a game show that their entertainment department put together. So I got to like joke around where there was an episode with Coach Sirianni and Howie Roseman, and then I did one with Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter, and we're not the same size. We're we're not the same size human beings. It was crazy. Like Jalen Carter's the smaller one out of those two, and I'm like, oh, that's the biggest guy I've ever seen. And then 6'6", 330 pound Jordan Davis walked in. And I'm like, oh, okay, never mind. That's the biggest guy I've ever seen. So, yeah, Cam Jurgens, Lane Johnson, but yeah, huge Eagles fan. I'm coming back, I think, for the Carolina game, from New York to go see that. I was at, unfortunately, the Falcons Monday night game, but yeah, the Eagles have been. This has been a really fun year. Like you have some not fun ones as an Eagles fan, but this is not one of those. This is watching Saquon. I don't know if I've ever seen like Iverson's maybe the only Philly athlete I can equate it to of like the electricity of watching him play night in, night out. It's real. I'm trying not to take it for granted because he's been unbelievable.
It's been an amazing season so far, almost
Hmm.
Super Bowl or bust at this stage of the game.
Hmm.
We'll see
Hmm.
what happens. We'll see what
Yeah.
happens. So you're presently on a national tour. Obviously, that takes precedence, but what's next for your career? What are some things you have cooking on the stove?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when you're touring and doing, like I just moved to New York about 2 months ago. So I've been doing a lot of shows here, but I'm still kind of getting my feet wet in the scene in New York. So I guess after this tour, after these shows, I have to make a decision of like what I'm trying to write a new hour, like a brand new hour of stand-up. So this show that I'm doing at Helium on December 5th. Like I am trying to do a totally different. I'm trying to do a show where none of the material that I did on the special that came out in September of 2023 is on there. So which is a challenge. So I'm really doing. So once I have that full hour, about 35, 40 minutes into it, of brand new stuff that I really like, that's when I decide, all right, am I going to do this as an album? Am I going to record another special? Do I film it and just put it out on social media? So that's something that I'm in the middle of and trying to figure out. And I'm sure I'll go back and forth on that 400,000 times as to what I want to do with that.
Well, congratulations, Blake, on such an amazing career. When you
Uh,
come back to Philly, December 5th at Helium, first of all, welcome home.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Hopefully, also I'll be able to get down to that show so I can shake your hand and
Yeah,
give
let
you
me
a
know.
brotherly hug from the city of
Mhm.
brotherly love.
Thank you. Don't give me a brotherly shove. I will go down very quickly.
Understood. Congratulations once again, and much success to you in the future.
I appreciate it. Nice meeting you. Thanks for having me.